It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.
I'm there.
And we're back doing the podcast. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for coming by. Let's go around and introduce ourselves, and we'll get fired up.
Hey, guys. I'm Chad Jutner.
I'm Peter Lawrence.
I'm Ian Rivera.
I'm Cooper.
And I'm Kyle Bacher, and today we're going to talk about automation in AWS, and it's going to be on a number of fronts. So we're doing some interesting things. Cooper and Ian are joining us because they're working on some automation things and scripting and other stuff. So what are you working on right now in terms of automation?
So right now, Ian and I are working on a project based around Kubernetes, and specifically Kubernetes in AWS with AWS's managed EKS service. So the automation that we're looking at doing, or we've been implementing, is essentially using Terraform to spin up an EKS cluster, and then all of the resources that go into supporting that cluster, and then within that cluster, setting up some, say, monitoring services, and then some CI/CD services. So we just automate the spinning up of a cluster that has all the bells and whistles that we'd want. So if we were a company, we'd have an application, bring it into the cluster, all of the magic things that we want it to.
So go ahead, Peter. Sorry.
EKS, remind me again what that is?
Elastic Kubernetes Service.
Okay. So that'll bring in and out different Kubernetes services as you go, spin them up?
Yeah, it's managed Kubernetes service by Amazon. But yeah, it's full-fledged on Amazon, and it's kind of like a Kubernetes but tailored from Amazon, and they offer those services. So it's a good one, but it's one of those Amazon things that I think very good, or maybe very helpful, especially with the project that we were doing.
So Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but the use case on this particular project is to be able to quickly spin up a Kubernetes environment to be able to use it for testing and learning and things like that, but then not leave it running, being able to tear it all down and then quickly set it up again for the next time.
Yes, and I think that's one of the advantages when it comes to AWS. It gives you this option of you turning off a resource so that when you're not using it, for example, on the weekend or maybe during the night hours where you're not using it, the bill is not going up. And then when we're trying to test, let's say if we're going to use it for half a day, let's say maybe from noon to 4 or 5, we can just spin it up for that amount of time. So not only is it good as a resource, but it also, tackles down the cost analysis or maybe the cost part of it, which I think is a good, tactic, that Amazon has.
And are you guys using Terraform just as something to get used to a new language, specifically not CloudFormation, or you could do this? I assume you can do this in CloudFormation too.
Yeah, we can do it in CloudFormation. We didn't really have a preference on what we wanted to do. We just chose Terraform maybe because, in my opinion, I think it's more popular. But yeah, I think the same environment can be brought up using CloudFormation as well. And I'll be curious to see how we can do that further on during the project. So there's still a lot of testing and stuff that we're doing, but I believe CloudFormation can do this similar job that Terraform is.
Cooper, how about you? Why Terraform?
Yep. So short answer is I'm just more comfortable with Terraform, or I've used Terraform at past companies I worked for, or clients. I kind of prefer it over CloudFormation. And at least for the project we were doing, we leveraged some of the AWS created Terraform modules.
Oh,
so
nice.
The benefit we got from that was we can just reference single module, define some specifics, or tailor cluster how we want it, but we didn't need to set up each resource. So for example, the modules or the project that we're doing, it's creating 110 resources in AWS. And the EKS module is probably abstracting 80 of those resources.
Wow.
So it's kind of taking some of the management off our shoulders.
That is an amazing improvement, that's for sure. I've been writing CloudFormation myself this past few weeks, and I miss Terraform for sure. But
well, let me ask you guys, without tools like Terraform and CloudFormation and all this other stuff, dial your brains back half a decade. How would you have done this before these tools existed? What is this actually replacing for you guys? We all know the answer. I just want to hear Cooper and Ian.
Can I guess the answer? Cron jobs? Am I right? I don't know. I'm not.
No, you're wrong.
Okay.
I mean, it's it's definitely replacing, maybe for lack of a better word, the manual work that you'd be doing. You don't want to, once the process becomes repetitive, you want to be able at least to do it once, and then it's able to replicate itself. So I think that's the biggest thing we're targeting here. If we need to, just like Kyle mentioned earlier, whereby maybe we need to spin it down in terms of cost savings and spin it back up in the morning, we don't want to go through the entire process. Imagine deploying over 100 resources again just because you want to save cost. I guarantee it's going to take you almost a whole day. So just having that file, stored somewhere whereby you're able to access it and deploy the same resources over and over again, in different time periods. I think that's what incentivizes us to use that, because it makes our work easier.
You probably wouldn't even consider spinning it down overnight if you didn't have scripting and stuff that could bring it back up, right?
Yeah, it'd be too tedious,
Cooper, have you done anything not with CloudFormation or Terraform?
Not really. So I can give like the example, or the first company I worked for. So I've been in the DevOps space about a little over 4 years.
Yep.
First company I joined, my job was to kind of help take some like the manual tasks and convert them over either to like Terraform it or make it kind of automated. But I'd be curious to hear like your experiences with, if you've been on projects or at clients where you just haven't had those resources. Because
I've got it.
Is the term like click ops, where you just have to like click around and do all the configurations and then have like the little books of, hey, follow like these steps.
Yeah, checklists are certainly important.
Yeah, we didn't have cute words for it back then, though. We just called it
grunt work.
It wasn't
Tedious.
It wasn't. There was no brand around what we used to do. It was just tedious and boring. So
well, and oftentimes it led to differences, right? So if I use a template and I spin up something in 3 different environments, I get the exact same thing. If I use a human to spin up something in 3 different environments, I might get the same thing. I might get something radically different because, he decided he checked these boxes 3 at a time because he thought he did all the work, but turns out he forgot to set up the certificate, or, forgot to put the DNS entry in or something like that, right? So just a whole bunch of human introduced configuration changes. Well, it's better than the even older days. So I mean, Chad, that's what you were talking about, right? Like you end up with mishmash, or you could, of differences and just the pain of actually going through it, right?
yeah, I mean, before the old concept or practice of like infrastructure as code was a thing, it was kind of like what Cooper was talking about, right? Like it was a fairly manual, tedious process, error prone. And we used to do it just like checklist manifesto style, right? Like we're firing up way back when I was a Sun E250 guy, right? That's Sun microsystem servers. We're building a new instance of that. And here's all the things we got to do. Don't forget to set, resolve.conf the right way. Don't forget to set all these other really tedious configurations exactly the same. And we would build scripts and hacks that kind of mimic a little bit like what infrastructure as code does today. But it wasn't great. It wasn't fun, and it was incredibly boring and dull. Yeah. So you guys realize you're living in a golden age. It is so much nicer. You do still encounter that at some clients. I think you'll come across like legacy systems that are set up that way. Pray to God that you don't have to replicate a legacy environment. That's kind of not really what we do. But if you do, you'll realize really fast how great these tools are. And how wonderful it is to have tech stack that we do for DevOps. All right, so that's CloudFormation, that's Terraform, and then like AWS. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Like AWS actually provides tools that allow you to get some control over all the different aspects of your environment as well, right? Cooper, do you want to talk a little bit about like AWS config, or Ian, talk a little bit about like tools like AWS config, what that does for us, how that makes our lives easier, and how it makes, even to some degree, the accounting department a little happier with us.
Well, I'll speak on maybe AWS Lambda, because I used that on my previous client and it's still fresh in my memory. Maybe Cooper can tag on AWS config, but especially with like AWS Lambda, and it's a service that has to do with code, so any processes that requires maybe to write code, or if you have like custom code that you need to do, then AWS Lambda will probably be the best option for you. And it's serverless as well, so you can find that comes in very handy and very helpful. the New Relic, all the metrics that are available in New Relic, that custom metric wasn't there. And we had to do that. And I was working on chat, not chat, the other chat on that. But yeah, he was able to write down a piece of code, and we had to run it down through AWS Lambda, and generated that metric, that custom metric in New Relic, right? So that saved us a lot of time. It's something that the client really wanted to get, and it was kind of like high on the priority list. So initially, I thought, okay, man, that's going to be a bummer because, how are we going to go up, about that? So it was also kind of like a good learning process for when it came to AWS Lambda. I guess what I'm trying to say is you can see how a service like that helped us solve an actual real life problem, something that a client needed, and we use an AWS service. And it's not only, does not only cater to that, you know what I'm saying? Any metric that you may need that you may not find, they call them custom metrics, that you may not find maybe on the platform, or whatever agent that you're using is not available, you're able to, use AWS Lambda for that. So it is, I don't know if I would call that automation, but, I know it helps more than the process. So
but filling in a gap, right?
Yeah, filling in the gap would be the best bet. So yeah, that comes in handy, and it's something that I think other companies can leverage as well, especially if in the industry that we're in, for sure.
So I have tasks that I do in AWS. If somebody needs a sandbox, I go in and I set it up, and that's all manual. I think we looked at scripting stuff, and it was maybe more work than just going out and doing it. And then Cooper, you wrote some stuff to tear down the sandboxes. And basically that's kind of the start of a collection of tools that we can use to automate certain tasks. I guess where I'm going is it's all about helping me make my job easier when I got to do that stuff.
Well, I was gonna say,
in my opinion, Carl, there are certain things that I would do on the dashboard, let's say, the console itself, versus certain things that would actually maybe require writing like a CloudFormation template, right? And most times it comes to, if you're doing a project like me and Cooper are doing, of course, the massive project, there's a lot of resources. It really doesn't make sense at all, using the console, because you're going to be there all night, you know what I mean? Versus if I need to make, let's say, like a role, right? I can still create, a resource for a role, I am role. But it's something I can do maybe within a minute on the console. So why would I, you know what I'm saying? So whatever makes it easier is the route that I would take, So to answer your question, depending on the on the task and how complex it is, for some it may just maybe easier for you to go on the console. While for some it may need you to kind of like maybe write a script or a template depending on the task at hand.
I will say this: a comment I heard last week was, "Well, it's so easy to do on the console. Like I just go in and I click a box or two, and that's all I needed to do." And then, but the nice part is that they then would take what they produced in the console down, take a look at it using some of the CLI tools and produce a CloudFormation to make that repeatable. Cooper, we were talking about AWS config, what that provides for us.
Yeah, so AWS, at least like the benefits of config, or like what it's there for, is essentially just it audits the resources that are deployed in an account. So Chad, kind of like what you were talking about with configuring like servers, maybe a little easier to do like one server, but if you have like 10, 100, it can kind of scale out of control. So at least with config, you can set up like flags or things you want to look for or get alerted on. So if something kind of goes out of compliance, you can have like the little flag raised and be like, oh, I need to kind of fix this. And they have a lot of cool integrations or kind of steps you can do with config. So if something does go comes out or non-compliant, like Ian was talking about with lambdas, you can trigger a lambda, and then you can kind of create like auto remediation steps.
Nice.
So a good and classic example is if you have like an EC2 instance with a security group, if the security group opens up all access to SSH port 22, it's like, hey, that's probably not good to have. So you can have
my favorite security group, though.
You can have a rule that locks it down or kind of removes everything, and then hey, you have to fix this.
So it can go behind the scenes and take away that security group that's out of compliance, and someone will, at that point, things will not work, and they'll have to come in and add the appropriate security groups, the minimal security groups to make it work, right?
Yeah, and it would be depending on what the client's looking for or their use case. For example, if they have a known IP that's valid for them, you could just replace it with that. But if they find it needs a human being to look at it or assess it, you can build that in. So the lambdas offer all the customability that you'd be looking for.
Nice. And then are there So with AWS config, you set up rules, or does it help you set up rules?
Yeah, so they have a bunch of like predefined rules, or kind of like what they'd identify as like best practices, but you can create like any rules that you want, or you can create like the custom rules to kind of fit the needs that you're looking for.
So 4 out of 5 admins really like these rules, and so we've provided them for you. Is that kind of the thing? And then the remediation is done through Lambdas, or you can do it through the AWS config itself in some cases, or not? Does anybody know?
I'm actually not positive here. I know like the main ones I've played around with are setting up the Lambdas, because from my understanding it is, or at least on the one side, it's you just have to like define the API calls to remediate, or do the either using like Bodo 3 to kind of like make the resource changes. But I guess I'm not positive if they have options like built in to config with that.
You threw Bodo 3 out there, like
yes. Say a little more. Say a little more, Coop.
So if I'm writing a Lambda function to do some of these like remediations, I'll usually like my go-to would be writing it in Python, or using like the language Python to write it. And within the Python language, there's a fantastic package called Bodo 3.
Okay.
And Bodo 3 just exposes all of the AWS API calls that you need like within Python.
Hey, I've got a question for the two of you. So these tools have saved you a ton of time, right? Like it's made everything about setting up environments, building out environments, and maintaining environments easier, more efficient, faster, all that stuff, right? So you have now so much extra time. What are you doing with it? All that time that you save now, where does that go?
We're learning new technologies. That's what we're doing with it. I mean, the new AI stuff that is coming up now. So we gotta have our eyes open. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I like how you brought that up. Of course, I feel like automation is where the world is going, right? And I know AI is a whole different topic, but I think the main point with even AI is mainly kind of like to make the process smoother for a lot of us, right? Instead of, let's say, like going to, Google and maybe doing some research for like 30 minutes, I can just maybe go to ChatGPT and ask a question and get some answers. But so automation is really a thing. Yes, you're right. It does save a lot of time, but you got to realize, especially with the field that we're in, there's so many different technologies out there. There's so many stuff that we need to know and learn on a day-to-day basis. I know like another thing that we're doing with our project, I know we're using our CD, which it's not fairly new, but it's something that maybe I haven't had as much experience, as maybe my Cooper. So when you have that extra time, like you said, you better dig in deep and figure out how other things work, But I feel it's also like the nature of the industry. There's always something new coming up. Mm-hmm. Every now and then, you wake up today, you wake up tomorrow. I'm sure there's something new. So as it comes to free, I don't really call it free. I just call it, time that you can use for the better good. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
I think it's beneficial for everybody.
Cooper, how about you? You got all your spare time? You're just kicking back, having some iced tea, or you figuring out better ways to do things?
So at least with the Kubernetes project we did, or we're working on, currently I'm banging my head against the wall on some like Grafana configuration errors. So ChatGPT hasn't figured out the that error yet.
Oh, AI is going to let us down.
Was updated in the last couple of months, or in the last couple of years. Actually, speaking of ChatGPT, have they? So I don't know the answer to this yet. Have they actually applied some of these tools to some of the AWS AI services that they're offering? Like, does AWS config talk to like Bedrock and all those other AI platforms yet? I'm guessing you could probably make it work through some weird combination of AWS config sending messages to SNS, to Lambdas, to Bedrock services, blah blah blah. But I was just wondering if they've done any of that magic where sometimes you just click a button and all sorts of things happen under the covers that we used to do manually.
In my experience, not yet, or maybe I haven't seen it yet, to answer your specific question. However, what I must say is there are certain types of, let's say, like errors that I've had, just walking through the project that, I would type the error in ChatGPT and I would get a pretty good response. So it probably is a resource, but to answer your question on what you said, no, I haven't seen like a specific let's say like connection, but I think it's knowledgeable to a certain extent.
I would say the same, or I haven't seen them like introduce anything yet. I'd be curious like how long it takes them to.
Maybe ChatGPT is writing it for them right now so that it can then integrate back with ChatGPT. No, wait.
I have a
Bedrock,
list
right?
pulled up from ChatGPT right now telling me what all the automation things are in AWS. I was going to just throw some out there like I was smart about it, but I figured I'd be honest. The monitoring and management piece is standing out to me as something that I'd like to understand.
That's the part you worry about, isn't it, Kyle?
Yeah, because of my nightmare scenario when Chad develops his new facial recognition algorithm and needs to test it against several petabytes of video and leaves it on over the weekend because he goes to the cabin and has fun. And then we get a bill for $12 billion. And I'll tell you this, the stories I've heard, Amazon is pretty good at giving developers a break. Something gets out of hand. I'm guessing it's not like every time. And if it's just a small account, developer account, versus a company's large organization might be different. But yeah, that's my nightmare scenario. So we have a few budgets set up and I get budget alerts and I'm still trying to figure out like when I get those, where to look to see what where we're going over. And it's low enough that I don't really have to care too much about it. We're not spending that much money. But then stuff like Bedrock, we might have people that want to play around with Bedrock and it's going to be like 2 to 5 cents an image. Which 75 people make 100 images, it's like, it's not going to be that bad. It's like $150 or something if math works. That's kind of been the stuff I've been looking at. Also, the idea of spinning up servers quickly, like a Windows server or just a virtual machine running Windows. Sometimes we have special requests for systems and things like that. And, I wonder if that would be an option versus just everybody getting a laptop every time they have to do a special project, or we could spin something up, let them do it, spin it down. So I've got some use cases I've been thinking about. When I think of automation, I think of business process automation because that's the world I came from, like using an Nintex or workflows, things like that. This doesn't really have those specific tools, and these tools are geared more in just using the services, making things easier, saving time. So Cooper, you've had a really good look over the way we're set up, and you're working on the Kubernetes thing. Do you have any general recommendations of the direction we would want to go? Additional automation around managing our own account and org?
Yeah. So yeah, like I've been able to like kind of get a sneak peek at like the SDG AWS account, like org level, and then see like the sandbox account structure. So like I have a sandbox in the SDG org, but like to what you're mentioning about playing around with like AWS or like the Bedrock services, we were talking about it recently where with Bedrock, they have like a provision throughput pricing model. There's just a lot of things where if you accidentally set up something the wrong way, you're on the hook for, or you're spending like a lot of money. So there's like a lot of valid concerns around like the pricing or just kind of making sure there's guardrails on projects. So I think you mentioned it the other day with like applying service control policies, which are basically just guardrails at the organization level. And then you can apply them to like sandbox accounts or like groups of accounts. And essentially that you can kind of add the guardrails so that it's like, hey, if we have a developer in a sandbox account, they probably don't need access to like the largest EC2 instance, or we might not need to like even have them like look at that option. We just say, hey, these are some like valid instances. If there's one you need that we don't have, talk to us and we can add it. But some of those are the service control policies could add a lot of value, I think.
Well, I think maybe we put that next on the list. Would make me happy, but you guys are chugging away on learning stuff and all of that. So I don't want to take your time away from learning, but I will say that's the next thing you will be doing.
Yes.
Unless you tell me different.
It sounds to me like you need to do some consulting.
Yes. Yeah, yep. I'm going to hire Cooper, and he's going to earn his money.
There.
So how about using CloudTrail for some of this automation? You guys doing anything with that?
Oh, yeah. So that was like one of the other pieces where like I don't think we fully have like the trail set up yet. So essentially, yeah, like because we can play around and set up either if we would want to like Terraform things, because there's a lot of best practices that we could enable within Terraform, and then there kind of infrastructure as code. We don't have to like worry about clicking around or anything. So yeah, like CloudTrail, which essentially just tracks any API calls that are made like in an AWS account. That's one of like the first things if you're setting up a new account and kind of like locking it down or securing it. The CloudTrail logs are a massive one to have.
So that's the thing that's writing down all the things that are being done, and then some of the other services look at that and take action, basically.
Exactly, yeah. And then you can set up the events. So there's a lot of like best practice, like events to potentially like flag or look out for. For example, if like your root user is logging in without like MFA, that's usually like a flag that goes up. There's various other ones that like, hey, if this event's going on, this is like not normal, or we should kind of look into this.
Immediately after our well-architected podcast, I went in and set up MFA for the root account because Chad mentioned that was one of the low-hanging fruit. So we're good.
And I can say like, so AWS has, I know like a few years ago, but they've introduced a lot of services that have kind of like are aimed at helping get more visibility into the accounts. So there's like guard duty for looking at like network monitoring and just like offloading some of the management. There's security hub, which you can pull in like the center for internet security like standards, and then even some like AWS like best practice recommendations. They've introduced a lot of services or tools that they try to help get the info out there and just make it easy to be like, oh, hey, we can do this to improve our security.
There's been a lot. I think a lot of changes they've made along that front. There was a incident where a consultant left an AWS instance of something turned on, and it was open to the public, and it had a bunch of stuff in there it shouldn't have had. So I noticed when I've set up a S3 container for Ben to store some stuff. It was really like, hey, are you sure you want to open this up? Like, it had more safeties on it. And I think I had to do a thumbprint and a retinal scan and get permission, get a note from my mom to do it. But it seems like the security stuff has really been ramped up.
Your mom lets you open S3 buckets? I'm not sure that's right.
So, Chad, are you guys using AWS for stuff right now?
Yeah. I mean, we're using AWS in a fashion very similar to Cooper's Backstage thing that he talked about yesterday. Did we talk about Backstage yet? You gave that cool demo yesterday, and it might actually be an entirely different podcast episode that week.
But we can tease it.
Yeah, we can. So guys, get ready. Cooper just volunteered to be on another podcast where we're talking about Backstage.
Yeah.
It's going to be awesome. But yeah, so we're using quite a bit of it. On my current assignment and previously, a lot of what Cooper's talking about, I used at my last company, and we did a lot of like we would always default to AWS services for things, right? So you think of like messaging in an application. You know, we used I don't know what you guys use on the Microsoft side, Peter. I'm sorry, but on the Java side, like ActiveMQ is super popular. Instead of instantiating our own ActiveMQ instance for messaging between applications, we would use SQS, right? So instead of like firing up our own Grafana instance, we tried as best we could to use like CloudWatch and all the CloudWatch dashboards that they give you. Yeah, I used to be way more into the AWS internals than I am today. Today, I've got the luxury of having an obfuscation between me and the AWS consoles that I don't necessarily have to work with, which is really nice. And maybe that's another thing that Coop and Ian can talk about. One of the biggest things that I had a problem with prior to my current gig is just building a lot of these tools into a repeatable CI/CD pipeline, actually making configuration changes to various things part of our build process. I mean, you've already touched on CloudFormation, right? Which does a lot of that stuff. Do you guys have experience like building CloudFormation config changes into a pipeline that actually gets deployed with the rest of an application, right? Like say I'm going to production, right? And I've got a dev and a stage and a prod environment, and I want all three of those things to roll at the same time as the code, right? I want the dev config changes to happen, and I want to go to stage, and I want to have a repeatable production deployment process. Have you guys done that too, and just built CloudFormation deployments into any kind of pipeline, whatever you're using? If one of you just says no, then that was a lot of setup for nothing. So if you haven't, just pretend that you did.
I did talk to Akila a bit yesterday, and she has done what you're talking about Chad, as part of like a QA process, getting our system set up. So we have done it.
Yeah, and I can mention at like the last company. So I contracted for, I don't know if I can say the name, but contracted for like an enterprise company. And part of what I was doing there was helping with like migrations from Bitbucket to GitLab. And like on the GitLab side, they were introducing all of like the CI/CD pipelines for that. So they had a lot of applications, kind of where they had, say, like, for the example, they had a few like Lambda functions where you had a repository. Within the repository, you had like the Lambda function code, but then you also had like the Terraform code. And as part of the deployments, it would do like the linting of the code, security checks, but then it would also kind of deploy, I think they had like four environments. So going from like dev all the way up to production, and at least with like, from what we saw in the pipelines, just making each step like repeatable or just reusable. So if you're going from environment 1 to environment 2, the main components of the pipeline are all the same. It's like, how are you building the code? It's the same. Where are you like kind of finally deploying it to? It would essentially be the same. Just instead of like a dev server, it's prod server. Or instead of like a dev Lambda function, it's a prod Lambda function. Yeah, they did like a really nice job with the promotion and just making it reusable. So there really wasn't too much of a difference between how things were being deployed between stages.
A little bit of config changes and not much else, right?
Yep. Yeah. Like use this values file or use this, use this environment specific file instead.
So
were they doing? Go ahead. Go ahead, Kyle.
Oh, I was just wondering about, cost. You're setting all that up. Are you able to show that the cost of the work is going to be of benefit for what you've built, the automation piece? Is there enough to hang? Calculating ROI is really difficult, and there's always got to be stuff you got to hang your hat on. And if you're not standing behind somebody with a stopwatch or doing that kind of thing, measurements, but is that generally a big savings to do that? And then the work itself, in addition to that, you've got the accuracy and kind of the bumpers in place, the guided process to go through all that, your 4 environments and the things you build. How has that worked out for you when you've done those projects?
Honestly, like when I've done them, those questions have kind of been answered higher up on the chain.
Really?
At least like from my perspective, one of the biggest benefits that I saw, it was just, ideally it was making developers' lives easier. And then if the developers' lives are easier, moves up the chain. And then arguably, like if you have a good process, you can just be like, oh, we have better security around this now. Or, oh, this is like we're less likely to make mistakes that could cause the company to lose a lot of money.
Yeah, and those, just those safeguards have huge value. And anything that can make Chad's job easier should be done.
I would not argue. Yeah.
And I was also curious, I know outside the AWS automation, I know it's like maybe 5-6 years ago where some of these tools weren't available. And I know you guys maybe already active, in this field. How are you guys executing automation back then?
So I started a previous gig. We used AWS had a product called, or I think they still do. It's called OpsWorks. OpsWorks, I forget which was, but it was basically a hosted instance of Chef, right? And I think Chef and Puppet and Ansible's Salt Stack, like those 3 things, if I remember right, I'm not a great historian, but like those 3 tools kind of kicked off the whole DevOps infrastructure as code practice kind of that we know of today. And it started off really simple. It was, I haven't actually been able to use CloudFormation myself firsthand, but from what I understand is, it was really just automating everything that I talked about that we used to do 20 years ago, right? Like you instantiate a server, think of like a Docker file, right? Like you create a Docker image and the first like 10 lines are all like, hey, apt-get blah, right? Get me all my tools that I need to have on this and then fire it up, right? So like I used OpsWorks. Prior to that, I used actual Chef, right? Like a standalone. Before OpsWorks was a thing, I actually hosted my own Chef server in AWS just on a straight up EC2 instance and then used that to manage my environments. And it worked out pretty well, yeah.
Jenkins was a tool back in the day. Octopus was another one. Octopus was more of a deploy tool rather than an environmental creation tool.
Yeah, so we used Jenkins quite a bit too before those types of tools kind of got built into like GitHub or I used Bitbucket. I actually loved Bitbucket, Cooper. I mean, I thought it was for what it was at the time, it was actually pretty slick. And it allowed me to get rid of yet another shared service kind of thing that I had to manage myself, right? So the more opportunity we got to use tools like that. And I know Amazon has CI/CD tools built in. I haven't used them mostly because those tools feel nicer when they're exactly where my code is, right? So I check code into GitHub. I like having some of those GitHub automation tools in place. I check code into Bitbucket. Bitbucket's pipelines works really, really well as a CI/CD if you don't need to do anything too fancy.
Yeah, and I've been using Code Build and Code Deploy on AWS side. You check code into GitHub and AWS picks it up, pulls it across, builds it, and deploys it out to the EC2 instance that was spun up using CloudFormation. So all those things are fun and amazing.
We're going to talk about your idea of fun, Peter. We'll litigate that next time we have a happy hour. But it is neat to have those. I mean, me and Peter keep talking like we're really, really old men, and we are.
Yes. But in computer terms.
But genuinely, guys, like the way that we used to build and deploy applications, even 20, 21, 22, 23 years ago, I started doing this stuff in like 97, 98. In early 2000s, there was a lot of hand-rolled, weird, dumb solutions for a lot of things. And it is,
well, and I was partially curious, like, because the experience you all have is pretty incredible. And I'm from like the automation perspective, I'm kind of curious. I think in the podcast episode last week or 2 weeks ago, you guys talked about like say future predictions. But I'm kind of curious how you see automation or just the space evolving. So like for example, I've seen AWS's version of like Copilot or their like Code Whisper. One of the features they've introduced is like a security scanning tool. So they'll kind of like automatically look at your code. It's like, oh, I know this is like a vulnerability. This is kind of like how you fix it. I'm curious, like, what you guys see the future of infrastructure automation or just automation in the space looking like.
Well, you go first, Peter.
Coding as automation is already present in Visual Studio. You've got AI helping me code, intuiting what code I want to type next and what I want to do. It's going to help me not make security vulnerabilities in my code because I forgot to add something or added something that I shouldn't have. I think it's going to help me write better, repeatable code. Same as a lot of the other tools that we're talking about here is repeatable. I don't know about you, Chad, but I've been up till 4 a.m. looking for a config difference between one environment and another after a deployment and finally finding it. And that's something that you guys are going to know anything about that kind of thing, right? If your Terraform runs in dev, it's going to run in prod. How about you, Chad?
I think you're going to see a lot of, I don't want to just like rubber stamp AI and say, yeah, they're going to build AI into blah, blah, blah. That's kind of lazy and cheap thinking, but I think they are going to build in more, like we got the exciting stuff today, like Terraform and CloudFormation, and all those tools are pretty exciting, and they actually do something. And now they're going to start bolting on all the boring crap that nobody loves, right? Like compliance stuff. Peter mentioned the security scanning, the security vulnerability stuff. I would imagine that you start getting some code coverage tools built in just across everything now, right? Like to say, that feeds into the compliance and all of the regulatory kind of nonsense that some companies actually have to put up with, right? So I think all the exciting stuff is out there and it's happened. And yes, AI is going to make this a little bit easier, and you're going to start typing and it's going to just kind of code complete an environment and a configuration for you, right? And that's great. And
will it write all your comments for you? Like you won't have to comment code anymore. It'll just go in and see what you're doing. And
so it's actually funny you say that. It won't, but it will. Like my IDE right now, I use IntelliJ, JetBrains, and there actually is when I'm reading stack traces, right? If something happens and I throw an error and I see a stack trace, there is an AI assist now that says help AI put this in context, right? And it actually communicates, like goes out and pulls back an answer from an AI, and there you go. There's a little bit a smarter commentary around what's going on locally in your application, and I would imagine you might see aspects of that in in tooling outside of my local dev environment, right? Like things like Datadog and CloudFormation, or not CloudFormation. What am I thinking of? CloudTrail. There you go. CloudTrail and CloudWatch and all of those things, I think, can do very similar things where they just say, hey, put this in context, right? Like, tell me what this means. Build out intelligent dashboards based on, build out maybe even like a little neural net out of my log files and show me, exactly commonalities between and frequencies between all my messages and errors, right? Like it's not that hard. It's not that crazy to imagine that stuff becomes more conversational and less technical.
Yeah. I will say that AI does a great job about taking away the mundane, right? And I think it's going to continue to build on that. I don't know that Chad or I will ever be out of a job, but we're old. But I don't think you guys will be out of a job either.
I think it makes entry level easier for a lot of folks, right? Like, there's still going to be a demand for our services. It's going to be a lot easier for somebody, first year, second year developer to be productive faster than they would be without it, right? Like, there's still a learning curve. There's still a lot to know, but having an AI, like I always say, it's like a rubber duck that actually talks back to you. Like that AI is, there's non-zero benefit to having a paid ChatGPT subscription, right? Like it actually helps my my day-to-day go a little bit easier.
Maybe
I use it. I have trouble with like complex pricing structures with lots of explanations and costs that are 0.0002 cents per whatever thing. So I'll just copy and paste those into ChatGPT, and it's like, can you explain this to me? And it'll break it down and explain it, and then I'll understand it. It's helpful, and I just have one little grain of worry that it, steered me wrong on something. But no, it's hugely valuable. As I look through the list of automation stuff that it kicked out, it's helpful for me to kind of understand where these things fit in with the different services. But yeah, the idea of when I would do a big complicated Nintex workflow, I would write pseudocode for the whole thing, and then I would go code it based on that. Well, maybe AI will just take my pseudocode and do that for me.
That's coming. UML to code. It's 30 years later, it's finally coming.
Kyle, I did get distracted for a second. Did you mention SharePoint yet?
No, I mentioned Nintex, which there is a SharePoint version for. But SharePoint's coming out with something called Syntax, which is a content management thing. The thing I've been talking about for years, that's happening now. So it'll go through and help you do all sorts of stuff with your current company content. There's also Copilot coming. There's Sales Copilot, which is kind of out of reach right now. There's a lot of things happening in the AI space and SharePoint, which is what we're here to talk about today.
All right. My parting thought is automation might not be free, but it's a lot less expensive than the alternative.
I agree.
How about you, Chad? What's your parting thought?
I'm envious of these guys and the tool sets that they get to work with these days. It was, Peter's story about 4 a.m. trying to find a config change. That's real, man. Like, and it was insidious. Like you would find just the weirdest things. So, and it's kind of a double-edged sword because when I had to find that kind of thing, it was, it really broadened my tech knowledge, right? Like I couldn't get away with just knowing how to build Terraform. I had to be an expert in networking. I had to be an expert in Linux, Unix, Sun, whatever Sun OS was available at the time. I had to be an expert in a lot of different things to find that, somebody typoed, a config that was moved over here, or there's a file that file corruption was a real thing that happened back then. They FTP'd something in binary mode and it screwed up the text file or whatever, right? Like those were real things that happened. And I'm jealous of these guys that get to not have to deal with that anymore. You guys have a whole bunch of other headaches, right?
Right.
That AWS ProCert is no joke. So you guys also have to know just a bunch of things. But yeah.
Cooper, how about you? Parting thoughts?
Well, let's see. I agree with Chad where I'm excited with the tools we have available. Because I've been in the space for 5 years. And just how it's evolved since that short amount of time, it's pretty amazing to see. Curious what the future holds.
Awesome. Ian, how about you?
Well,
you get to go last, Kyle.
Well, Parting thoughts is, well, one thing, I'm not jealous of Chad. I'm very happy that I'm in this time frame. Here, let's start with that. But I think the bittersweet pill for us is there's so many solutions that are coming out there, which is very good. The other side of it is I feel like they are all coming so fast. So there's a lot to kind of digest at the same amount of time. Yes, it's just, for example, Kubernetes just came out. It was hot. Now the AI, they all have ways of simplifying. But if you look at the time frame, this is in a space of maybe 4 years, right? So, and I'm guessing there's more that is coming up. So from a digestive point of view, I feel like the time frame is short. But I guess that's also a challenge for us to kind of like, be able to speed up with things and catch up and not just stay on our couches doing nothing. But yeah, I think automation is good. And not only does it make our lives easy in our career, but I think it's going to change the world coming up.
It's a lazy boy Talladega with the leather. So my parting thought is that I am looking forward to feeling better about the way we're set up, assuage some of my fears about cost overruns, and then as I work with you guys on this stuff and dig more and more into it, I see potential in a lot of different places for different things, and the possibility of running that stuff in our production environment in AWS. And I think the future's bright, and I'll have to do less.
Awesome.
Chad.
Well, this was great. Cooper, we'll see you in a couple of weeks to talk about Backstage.
Did you do Bedrock or Backstage yesterday?
Did both. Oh,
Really?
Yesterday was Backstage.
I missed that. Did they record it?
I was supposed to, but I got, I might have gotten a little too excited to do the presentation, and I forgot to hit the record button.
Well,
That's
we'll
fine.
record the podcast.
You can tell me. Excellent. All right. I think with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.
All right. See you guys.
Yeah. And thank you, Cooper and Ian, for joining us. You guys did great.
You.
Thank you.
Hi, Emily. Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.